This is Anarchast.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarcho-capitalist podcasts on the internet. I'm Jeff Berwick. I'm here with Tony Pivetta from Royal Oak, Michigan. How are you, Tony?
Oh, fine, Jeff. How are you?
Good. It's nice and snowy up there?
Actually, today it's 45 and fairly pleasant.
Oh, wow. Got lucky.
It's chilly, but, you know, you expect that in Michigan in December.
And so, yeah, we wanted to have you on. You've published a number of articles on LouRockwell.com, and I've enjoyed them. I enjoyed your most recent one. But before we get into talking about some of those articles, I want to ask you the question I ask everyone is how you became an anarchist.
Okay. Well, you know, I've always been interested in political, economic value systems and so forth. I think basically through my high school and most of my college years, I was a New Deal liberal. For the most part. I was a civil libertarian. I didn't think drugs and prostitution and things like that should be illegal. I didn't trust the free market. I wasn't crazy about gun rights, believe it or not. But I had a conversion late in my college career. And let me back up for a minute. I grew up in a first generation Italian American, and one thing my parents really instilled in me politically was anti-war sentiment. They lived in northern Italy during World War II, and I remember coming home, 10 or 11 years old with the good war myth. But I call it the good war myth because we all believe here as Americans that the United States liberated Europe. Well, my parents have a slight different account. Not that they were fans of Hitler or Mussolini or anything, but they did live in fear of becoming collateral damage. And the village my mom lived in was actually kind of industrial, and she experienced strafings from the British Air Force. And apparently, I think also the American Air Force. So right there, I believe as a libertarian, as an anarchist, you realize what Bourne said, that war is the health of the state. And as such, it's very crucial that we be anti-war. I mean, certainly it's possible that there's such a thing as a defensive war, but I think those incidences are pretty few and far between. And I don't think anything the United States has done in the last 100 years really could be classified as defensive. But anyway, so I was a college student and, mostly a New Deal liberal. I took a couple of economics classes in my senior year in college, and I grew to appreciate the incentive structure of capitalism. And around this time, a year or two later, Ronald Reagan was running, it was 1980, Ronald Reagan was running for president, and a lot of my peers at school became interested in free market economics. And from there was a short jump into studying the constitutions and the Constitution and the classical liberal foundations of the Constitution. And I realized, at that point that our government, everybody swears to uphold the Constitution, but from the police on the beat all the way up to the president, the Supreme Court, and the Congress, everybody violates, with very few exceptions, I think, violates the Constitution, left and right. And in fact, to be a strict constitutionalist like Ron Paul, for example, I think he's a constitutionalist. He's regarded as some sort of crank, a nut, a zany. And I realized that something was definitely wrong with our political culture. And the more I delved into the free market, I started being, well, let's see, 1981 I read Rothbard's A New Liberty, For a New Liberty. It was the Libertarian Manifesto. And at that point, I started realizing that even the basic functions that most constitutionalists regard as being legitimately performed only by government, national defense, local policing, a court system, all those services can be provided by the free market, and in my view, be provided more humanely and more economically. And at that point, I think you can have a strict private property order. And as I the gist of my most recent article was, why liberty versus safety. I think the freer we are, the safer we are. The most pervasive criminal element in any society, bar none, is the government. They have a monopoly on force.
Yes, totally. As interesting, you're talking about people who are, how we should be anti-war. I always laugh when I hear that, because who's pro-war? Who? It's like being pro-murder or pro-rape.
Well,
Like,
you watch these primaries, and I think these people are crazy. The ones, the mainstream candidates, the neocons, they are pro-war. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's truly bizarre. I don't think there's anywhere in the world quite like the U.S. in that way. I think the brainwashing that's been going on there for decades now has just driven in all these concepts that just sound bizarre to anyone else outside of really the U.S. No one in Thailand is pro-war. No, it's just a bizarre concept that's just been driven home through decades and decades of propaganda. And like you said, saying that how the U.S. came to the rescue in World War II, and how they've been going around the world rescuing people by bombing and killing and raping them. It's just a bizarre history to the entire country that started out quite good.
Sure.
It's just terrible the way it's gone. But it's interesting now, as you brought up Ron Paul. Who knows, maybe people are starting to awaken from basically what I think is just brainwashing and just years and decades of propaganda and indoctrination in the school systems and things like that. Because the stuff we're talking about is quite basic. Don't kill anyone, don't hurt people.
The golden rule, really.
Yeah.
It's the golden rule in foreign affairs.
Yeah. And they look at us like, or the establishment in the U.S. try to portray us as being bomb-throwing people who destroy civilization.
Exactly.
It's just unbelievable.
When it's really the other way around, huh?
Yeah. Now it's really interesting that you're in just outside of Detroit. I guess Royal Oak is a suburb of Detroit. I've always been curious to hear a perspective on what's been going on in Detroit from sort of more an anarcho-capitalist perspective. I guess you've lived there most of your life, or your whole life?
Pretty much, from my 5th birthday on, pretty much.
Okay. And so what's been going on there, and what's happening, and why is it so bad there?
Well, I guess there are a number of factors. Everything's really tied to automotive, so if something goes bad in that industry, then of course we all feel the pinch. There's a lot of spillover effect. One issue that I don't think is really addressed very often, not even by libertarians, is, and this is back to the anti-war message I think we should really get out as anarchists. Michigan, historically, now I haven't seen figures lately, but historically, Michigan has paid quite a bit in taxes to the federal government and received very little back in the way of defense contracts. So I think in the 40s, 50s, 60s, it didn't really matter because the car industry was doing well, but once we hit the 70s and the car manufacturers faced this stiff competition from foreign auto manufacturers, I think you have to realize that the taxes that Detroiters pay, some of that comes from private personal income tax, some of it comes from corporate income tax. The corporate income tax means automakers, for example, here in Michigan, have less money, less profit with which to invest in their businesses for technological improvements. Part of the reason I think the Japanese have beaten us so bad in manufacturing automobiles is because they pay 1% of their GDP on defense, and we pay 6.5%. And we pay 6.5% because we're the policemen of the world. It's a drain on our civilian economy. And as I said, the money, the figures I used to see was the money we pay for federal income taxes, very little of it comes back. Most of the defense industries in California, for example, or Texas. So at least, not that this justifies defense spending, but at least they get some money back and some employment back for their federal dollars. whereas Michiganians do not. So I think that has something very much to do with the decline in the local economy here.
That's very interesting. I always look at government involvements, and people will look just in general at the economy and they'll say, oh, the U.S. has been doing worse and worse and worse. And it's, yes, of course, because the government's been getting more and more involved and taking more and more of people's money. And it's really bizarre. I was just on a website recently, and they were talking about possibly legalizing marijuana, which of course it should be. So many people wrote in and they're just adamant, yes, what we need to legalize it and regulate it and tax it. And it's like, why do you want to take money out of the economy and give it to the government that destroys it? Like, why are people so excited to do that? It's just unbelievable how brainwashed people are nowadays. And it's the same thing. So what you just brought up with Detroit, they've got a massive disadvantage. Just that alone, that's, you say in Japan it's 1%, and in the US it's 6%. That's 5% per year. That's a good return on an investment that's gone, flushed down the toilet, turned into bombs, and they end up in places blowing legs off of Middle East people and stuff like that, but that doesn't really help anyone, obviously, and it's obviously hurting a lot of people. So yeah, it's just unbelievable. And I think another thing that I was wondering if you're going to bring up were the unions in Detroit there. Unions could exist actually in a free market economy, but definitely not the way they exist in the U.S. today, with all the extra market rights they're given and all the things they're allowed to do. And I think from what I've read about the automotive industry in the U.S., that was a big help in destroying that industry as well. And it's because of the way that unions were allowed to do things, which they would never have been allowed to do in a free market. Because in a free market, sure, all the employees could band together and then they could come up with a thing they want to do a contract together, not individually. They want to do it together, but the employer would have the opportunity, the ability to say, I don't want to do that, goodbye, I'm going to hire other people. And they couldn't do that so much in the US, and that's been another factor that I've always thought was probably a part in what happened there in destroying the automobile industry there in Detroit.
There's no question about that. The auto workers union, wields a lot of power, and those jobs, I mean, if they went on strike, they could easily, the big three could easily replace those striking auto workers, because they make pretty good money. And, they could hire people for less, especially now with the, I don't know what the local unemployment rate is, but I think it's 15–16%. So, but you're right, it's the laws that protect unionism, not unionism per se, because you're right, you have a right as a worker to band together with other workers and walk out on your job, but then you as an employer should have the right to replace those workers. And in my opinion, you shouldn't even be forced to bargain with them if you don't want to. I mean, I think we have the right, employers have the right to replace striking workers here in the United States, but there are other things they can't do, and they can't not bargain. They can't. But if a union is certified by the National Labor Relations Board, then the employer has no choice but to bargain with that union. Otherwise, they're guilty of an unfair labor practice and they'll be sued. So,
yeah, it's kind of interesting that almost anything that's extra market or non-free market ends up destroying things in general. I was talking to someone recently and I said, in a business deal, I never actually want to win when I'm negotiating with another person on a business deal. What I want to do is come up with the fairest deal possible, because then both sides will be happy and we'll have a long future together doing other business, because we'll always have good feelings about each other. Whereas if one side wins the business deal, what happens is actually it hurts both people. The person who loses the business deal obviously feels kind of hurt about it afterwards, and even the person who wins, because humans actually know kind of what's right in their hearts generally, and if you kind of screwed somebody, it kind of will psychologically always bear on you. And I give the example, I'm from Vancouver, and the Vancouver Grizzlies used to be an NBA team, and they drafted a guy by the name of Big Country Reeves, and they paid him like $50 million, and he was this big, fat, slow, white guy, and they never should have paid him that amount. And you know what, it ended up almost destroying him, because he was coming to work every day, everyone hates him, all his teammates hates him, I was there shouting at him from the front row, telling him to quit, and he did quit, and he ended up, I hear, he went and ate a bunch of Kentucky Fried Chicken every day, away, and it just really ruined his life. Whereas if they would have negotiated a fair deal, and even renegotiated afterwards, he could have come to work getting his $1 million or $2 million a year, which he's probably worth, not 10, and everyone would have been happier. So again, with these unions, what happened? They have all these extra privileges and abilities in this non-free market, anti-capitalist American system there, and they end up destroying their own business by winning the deal. Initially, they got these huge pensions and huge benefits, but then the company dies in the end. But then here in the U.S. they prop up the company, which is sucks more money out of the economy and destroys more things. It's just unbelievable how these things can get out of control when you start to try to mess with the free market.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
So you had the one article on Lew Rockwell we haven't talked about yet. It was basically talking about how people give up their freedom for safety, and I really like that article because I'm always thinking about that when I'm on a plane, especially in the U.S. I actually say this. I say, I wouldn't mind if even 1 or 2 planes a year blew up. As long as I don't have to go through TSA, I'll take my chances. So what would be my odds? About 1 in a million or 1 in 5 million or something like that.
That's all right.
I'll take that chance rather than have to deal with these lineups. And if you look at a statistical basis, that's actually way better odds than most things. Let them blow up a few planes a year. I don't care. Even though that wouldn't happen, because actually the TSA is not stopping anything. If anything, they're actually creating problems and not doing anything. So with your article, you actually had some interesting graphs, and you talked about how different philosophies on how the market should be have different ways of looking at these things. Perhaps you can explain on that.
Yeah, I mean, I even think back to my own development, going from a constitutionalist to an anarcho-capitalist. Those are 2 of the graphs in my article. When I was a constitutionalist, I did believe there were certain basic functions only the state could perform, such as local policing and national defense and a court system. And I just didn't see how the market could perform those, at the time. And if you didn't have that, you would definitely have more disorder. That's why if you had less government than the constitutionally stipulated level of government, or guns and badges, as I call it, you see the curve going up for more chaos, in my terminology. But as I said, the more I delved into it, the more I realized that even constitutionalism, with apologies to Ron Paul, because I think he's a well-meaning constitutionalist, I just believe that even constitutionalism is a racket. Limited government is neither desirable nor possible. We don't need a limited government. The market can perform those services. And quite frankly, even if the market couldn't perform those services, I just don't see any government staying limited. So you would never stop at a constitutionally limited level of government. You would jump to where we are now, eventually, and worse. You would have, as you say, you have the TSA. The TSA has nothing to do with protecting us. If the government really wanted to protect us, they would stop meddling in the Middle East. The TSA is all about control and humiliation and letting us know who's boss, and that's all there is to it. Just like the FBI, the CIA, the cop on the beat. Basically, when it comes down to, they're the boss. If they really wanted to protect us, they would let us pay for the protection we want, or they would even let us forego all protection and maybe just arm ourselves. Why do I have to purchase police protection? Maybe I live in a safe neighborhood. Maybe I'd rather buy a gun and carry it on my person. And, of course, there are going to be disputes between people in any free society, but who's to say we need a government court system? There is such a thing as insurance in a free society. Insurance companies are economic actors who have a strong incentive to protect life and property. I have life insurance through my employer. I have house insurance through myself. Well, the insurance carrier doesn't want me to be killed, because then they have to pay off my wife. They don't want my house being broken into or burning down, because then they have to make me whole for that loss. So they're the ones who would probably hire some sort of mall cop sort of service, a security, and one that would really be more likely to protect our rights, because we could always fire our insurance companies if they had, if their security was not really security, but really just jerking people around like the TSA, we would fire them, and we'd hire somebody else, because somebody would provide that service at some price. And that's the way I look at it.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And I live down here in Mexico, and Mexico is much better than the U.S. in many ways in terms of freedom. But even here, they have a lot of things that I don't like. They don't allow foreigners to carry guns, and even locals are not really allowed to without some sort of permit and that sort of a thing. And that causes a lot of the problems down here, because what happens is the cops and the government are basically the criminals, which they are actually in every country, the same in the U.S. But we can't even protect ourselves from them, because they, if I have a gun, I'm taking a huge risk. I could end up in some Mexican jail, which is actually a lot of fun from what I hear. But I guess you can have all the prostitutes and drugs you want in there if you have some money. Oh yes, yes. It's not too bad, but it wouldn't be that big of a change from my regular life.
Oh, okay.
Anyway. That's about all the time we have for today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, Tony. Thanks for being on with us.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff. I really appreciate it. And keep up the good work with Dollar Vigilante and with Anarchast.
Oh, thank you very much. And that's all the time we have for today. So, peace, love, and anarchy. Bye-bye.
Bye.